All right. Rumor
Okay.
rumor has it it's January of 2021.
Is it still 2021?
I hope so. I'm not going to miss 2020.
No,
I hope
no.
I hope for a calmer year. I'll just leave it at that.
It's too late.
For the rest of the year,
I'm Todd. I'm
I'm
Todd Kidder.
yeah, all right. I'm Doug Splitter. We're going to talk some what's new around M365. Obviously, there wasn't a ton of changes around the holidays, but a few. And we've been off for a few weeks in order to spend time with our families. We hope everybody had a great New Year and everyone is safe and well for you. I'm covering some security stuff, a little bit of SharePoint roadmap, some Teams stuff, and an interesting Azure AD authentication change. Mr. Kiddo, what do you got going on?
Lovely. I'm talking some M365 CLI today, some Power BI, both preview and GA, Power Automate stuff, and Power Apps. So
Well, let's hit it.
got some Dataverse thrown in for good measure.
Let's start off with a little SharePoint, shall we?
Yes.
They released the roadmap pit stop, and I'm sure everybody on New Year's Eve was just totally tuned in, like waiting for it to go through it. I find there are times of the year where my news curation is more valuable to people than others. I think around holidays, maybe like we drop stuff, right? But not everybody pays attention to it. There was some interesting stuff around some of the template stuff you should look through for the SharePoint site header updates. I thought it was particularly interesting. They now have a send SharePoint pages to Yammer, which you and I previously automated on the show back. I don't know, probably in episodes like 90 to 100. We did digesting, reading the HTML stuff, and doing injection over into Yammer and assembling things
Mm-hmm.
through flows. And now they've just got a feature that says you could just ship this page
Lovely.
over and do a Yammer post. So I love that. And you and I've always said the reason our logo looks like is because Mind the Gap. There's a GUI, an API, and a PowerShell for that. And sometimes before the GUI is there, before the function is there, there's always the API, right? So we frequently start out deconstructing things like we did for the 365 change logs and stuff, right? And eventually, along time, the products come along. You don't have to wait is one of the important things, right? You can, if it's important to you, you can get ahead of it. But I always like to review it when one of the things we've showed turns into a core feature, right? So there's a
Yep.
new SharePoint success site template. So if you like that kind of thing on top of it, Teams and OneDrive's destinations when using the migration manager in the SharePoint Admin Center. I don't, if you have not had a chance to go volunteer for a small business that needs to move to the cloud and you're a serious IT pro, I would encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to find a nonprofit or somebody else still maybe has small business server, has legacy file server hanging around in their office, and they're like, you know what all needs to get up to SharePoint. It's a valuable
Right.
experience to walk through it, very humanistic determination around it. Sometimes those micro scenarios are much more complex than the enterprise. So we make these hard and fast rules, right? And you don't really get to experience the whole portfolio of the solution. That makes sense? Like,
Oh,
we're like, oh,
absolutely.
here's this ordinal set of services and we're all aligned, whatever it is. But when you have a 25 person organization you're supporting, it's a whole different game. And so I kind of like it. So I played around with the migration manager and all different tools in order to see what the best options were for moving. And some of these things are pretty cool and would also enlighten your enterprise skills, right? I mean, a friend of mine who's in Microsoft Services, Dan Jordan, I used to say the hardest deployments we ever did was small business server, because you had to have everything on one server with RAM optimized and performance and it was everything Microsoft made like on one box. And now, of course, in the cloud, it's all distributed and the rest of the
No
stuff.
microservices
So we
there.
had some,
No.
yeah, we had some pretty strong engineers go out and get their lunch eaten by serving a small business, right? Who were serious enterprise engineers, but when they got to constrained resources, they weren't as good. So I think it's an interesting thing to experiment with once in a while. There were obviously we covered this one, the adding teams to your SharePoint team site. So we covered that one in the previous review. They
Yep.
released a whole list adoption center, which I hadn't caught. Had you seen this?
I hadn't seen this either.
No, it appears to be very good. I am not good at this. Like I didn't make a proper leap from like to do to list to whatever it is. So I'm gonna spend some time on this one myself to try and amp my skills a little on top of that one. On top of it, they released the OneDrive roadmap for kind of where it's at and what's top of mind, right? And so a whole lot of details on what the security is going on for OneDrive and for the components they have going on top of that. The Graph Toolkit 2.0, including a new React package, so some cool stuff for devs got shipped on top of this one. And then the Microsoft SharePoint and Microsoft List sweater backgrounds got released. So if you're still in the mood to have like a winter sweater backdrop for your thing, they have those. Now you'd think to yourself, well, wait, why would you keep going? Surely it's over then. It's not. they put some teasers at the very bottom, so you have to read the blog post to get to it, which I really have no problem with because I'm nerdy enough to go.
Still scrolling.
Don't you love that? Still here. The JSON list form customization for the footer, header, and body. You should check that one out. Like that has some serious horsepower for doing some stuff on top of it.
For sure.
And the Microsoft List integrate menu option for roadmap that's 64.869. So woohoo. Anyway, so as I was scrolling through, I'm like, those are a couple of actually. If you keep, so lesson for all of us, keep scrolling on the SharePoint. I did that once, by the way. I sent an email to someone where I was like, here's all the digests. This is early in my career. And at the very bottom, I put, I'm sure all that was useful, but you probably never even read all the way to the bottom. And the person forwarded it off. This is back when I was a consultant. They forwarded it off to the client they're like, oh, it looks like Doug did a good work here, so I'll just send it off. They didn't read all the way to the bottom, but the customer did. Customer read all the way to the bottom. So
this is like after the credits.
Yeah, 100%. Like you missed the leading trailer on top of it. All right, cool. So obviously a SharePoint roadmap on top of things. Let's do a little security. There was
awesome.
there was an announcement on the blog post. I actually pulled the tech doc too, so we can take a little deeper peel on this one. That we've talked about doing this well for a long time, and I think it's finally done well in this instrumentation for it. And so it says we're continuing, extending Azure AD support for bring your own identity options. And so the extension to the BYO is essentially any email one-time passcode. There are in the post down below some questions that people are like, well, I don't understand, like, how would this work, whatever. What do you mean, how does it work? Every time you would have a timeout or an authentication, instead of going through another kind of dialogue, you'll go through a one-time code authentication.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what else to say about it, right?
It's very simple, but it's also, I think the confusion is probably just because, you're not used to.
Yeah, you're like, well, but then when do they enter? When do they provision the account? When do they don't? Now, if you had car rules around acceptance of terms of use or additional MFA registrations, then those would trigger post this event. Does that make sense? Like if you're going to use this is just for lack of a better term, in our old days, we used to call them pluggable authentication methods, right? So you'd socket these things in, and conditional access rules just essentially allow exactly that. You assemble your rules of conditional access in one legitimate way to authenticate. It does say that once authenticated, each session provides access to the shared resource for 24 hours. On subsequent sign-ins, users receive a new one-time code via email. So there's your duration of the authentication interval is 24 hours.
That's it.
There you go.
Pretty sure.
Right? Yeah. So on top of it, there was pretty decent documentation on exactly how the sequence works, and one important clarifier, because we're not the showy show, we're the real world show around here. So it is important that something that doesn't have a discrete entrance point, right, won't work with it. So for example, if you went to myapps.microsoft.com or portal.azure.com, that's not gonna work because it doesn't have a context to indicate to which Azure AD instance the authentication should be referred, because you're hosting this identity as a B2B/C-ish kind of identity within your authorization envelope, right? And we're hosting the authentication service, but it's your conditional access rules we have to process. So if we're talking about hitting Toddco, I have to know that the authentication should be gone to Toddco's AD for conditional access processing. Make sense?
Yep.
So
absolutely.
A lot of services you can certainly do that for. My apps with a tenant ID, portal.azure.com with a tenant ID, or myapps.microsoft.com. Direct links to applications as direct links. So if you went into Azure AD and got that SSO link, that would also work, right? And you put a short link out for it or something along those lines. So there's lots of ways to get it to that. But guest users are currently unable to sign in using endpoints that have no context, okay? The only way for us to do that would be to put a UI for home realm discovery, where you have one of those little buttons that says, well, I'm signing in. To what organization is granting you access? And you have to put in toddco.com or something.
Which is essentially the same as the above links.
Correct. Right? But there's currently no UI flow. Doesn't mean you couldn't build one, right? And have your own landing.
That seems like a very small price and necessary
Just
price.
Just wanted to point out, though, that people are like, hey, can't I use it everywhere? Kinda. But you have to do some work for some of the anonymous endpoints.
But in a certain way.
Yeah, in a certain constructed way. So a super savvy user who doesn't go to your link, who just goes to the raw service, it's going to try and home find them through normal techniques. This won't apply. Now, let's be honest.
Makes sense.
This is designed for your edge contractor use cases and consumer, they're not going to do that. They're going to log in however you told them to log in, right? I'm going to go around this process. But I did want to let you know that that is a limitation of the auth technique that exists on top of it. So that's pretty cool. But I did sort of peel the onion back, and I was like, I wonder how home realm works. And I hit the documentation, I'm like, oh, just like I think it does. Nothing has changed. All the rules.
No magic.
No, there's no Mathic. These are JWTs and OAuth and SAML, and like the only difference is that instead of a password authentication and provisioning and doing all that stuff, the email is considered the the identification, the password challenge is considered the OTP, and then you put your additional conditional access rules or CARs on top of it. Okay, so we went through that one, and that was the big one on top of it. By the way, if you have not done Solargate remediation, there is a nice post about that one for using Azure AD Workbook for helping you do an assessment against that. I'm pretty sure everybody's crushed it by now, but if you haven't, there was a great article that talked just about how, like, essentially it's one of the only times in our history of our company we just stopped software from running without a customer choice. Does that make sense? Like normally we're like putting the power in the hands of our customers to secure and choose what runs in their environment, but for this one, we literally pulled the plug on those certs and deauthorized them. So you'd have to go back in and allow that code to execute and run.
Right.
So supply chain. Now this is gonna be a whole year talking about how we do secure software supply chain management. I mean, I can already, my academic boards are just lighting up around it. I'm so glad I'm not currently teaching or taking any classes. Like, I'm super happy about that, because I just, like, everybody goes back to the core, like, how could this possibly happen? I'm like, what do you mean, how could it happen? Like, it's like anything else.
It actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's all these ingredients put together into this finished box of things, and then you're wondering, well, how could any one of those ingredients? Well, they're all digital, and you have to have transparency of supply chain and everything else. So it's pretty interesting. But at
every step.
The breakdown of the attack, though, is fascinating if you're a security wonk. And a lot of the research from the identity and security blogs are really good around it. So, all right. So there's a great Teams article on. Some of these are kind of puffy, you read them like enabling great teamwork with whatever. And I go, pretty puffy or light maybe. They do have some good stuff on end user training, and they talk about a data governance strategy. Data governance content is pretty good. And then they provide accessible and consumable end user training for all the team video training and references to that, including like content for education and tips for safe meeting registration and everything else on top of it. And some assets for how to go use it, including all the end user infographics, right? For where things are at. So it's actually a pretty good content bomb if you're trying to get the word out on how to do a work safe inside of Teams from a capability standpoint, including having somewhere in here there's the admin flow for like things the admins should go do on top of it. And I didn't understand that the stat they said the workers for permanently working from home is expected to double in 2021. Have you seen that stat?
No. That's
permanently. So in other words, like this ain't going back, right? So, which shouldn't surprise any of us. If you establish a certain amount of flexibility, you're going to go back to your employer and go, "Have I been doing my job? Have I? I want to keep doing it this way, right?" Okay. So my last one is sort of what's new in Teams from the December, roll up, which they always do in the following month, which is why we're still talking about 2020 on top of it. But the virtual breakout rooms, which are awesome, end of meeting notifications, good stuff. The Teams pre-meeting join experience, which we've had for some time inside of Microsoft and really is, I think, kind of wonderful personally, right?
Yeah.
That got rolled out on top of it. New language support for real-time translation. I can finally get my friends from Canada off my back with the French-Canadian component coming in on top of it, and some traditional and other languages and stuff coming on top of it. So up to 50 different languages on top of that. So they really busted out, got all those, the traditional languages we have over on the platform side are now all running inside of the Teams context. Live event limits have remained increased until June 30 of 2021. So we're continuing that just gargantuan event size limitations on the caps without asking, extending on top of it. Some new calling interfaces on top of it, which weren't, and the devices, which we already covered at the end of the year. So I'll kind of skip past those. But improved search, files offline in iOS, video playback changes on top of it, and then the Yammer conversations in Teams got some uplift and improvements on top of it. And then we talked about the add a team to a site on the SharePoint blog side from coming around, and document libraries. There is some pretty cool stuff around the broad distribution apps, right, on top of it. So they're fixing that publication process. I don't know how else to say it, right? So they're kind of getting that publication flow all tuned in. And then there is you can now restrict in management Windows and Mac manage device sign in to specific tenants. So I'm going to pause on that one because that's a pretty interesting control vehicle. So you actually have specific tenant control. And then for meetings, only invited users can join with a new lobby setting that's coming to team. Only people I invite. Yeah. Now, still,
this one for me is
obviously, if I invite you and you call in from your mobile, you're still lobbied because I don't know that's you, right? But if you are an authenticated user, then whoosh. If you're coming in from your organization, across organizations, or anything else. Team for Education got some new stuff on top of it. Healthcare got the EHR connector for virtual visits, which is pretty smooth. If you haven't seen that one, if you're in healthcare, go look at that one. There's a lot of skunkworks stuff happened in the early days of COVID to do that, and all that work sort of got pro'd up, for lack of a better term, right, and is now present inside of it. First line workers, they now have a badge customization for the custom badge for the praise stuff. I have never been a huge badge person, but I'm starting to be converted. Yeah, I think they're interesting ways to sort of put like certifications and praise and and just sort of like how do we do those sort of virtual award kind of acknowledgement moments and things. And so I'm starting to flip over a little on that one.
That's great.
Gov got virtual breakout rooms for our Gov people. Teams pre-join experience, PowerPoint file sharing, multiple number dialing. So a lot of catch up on top of it. Inline message translation in DoD, present status duration in GCC, offline in GCC, Linux client in GCC High.
Love it.
Yeah, so some really good stuff. DLP for Teams in Gov. And GCC support for device management in the Teams Admin Center. So a really lot of improvements in the high security GovCloud scenarios. And obviously with all the Jedi work and everything else, it doesn't surprise me that continues to be an emphasis point for those different platforms. So there we go. That is my roundup of things that are from the new year. I'm going to cut to you, sir.
All right. Okay, I think I'm on.
You are.
So I've got, like I said, I got a couple preview things and I got a couple GA things. I thought this one was great. We're calling this the Datasets Hub, and this is another, I think, elevation or promotion of Datasets as first-class citizen in Power BI. So this basically is saying that it's not just about reports, it's not just about dashboards, it's about the data that sits behind all this and allows you to kind of elevate those things through also Teams, by the way, not just inside of the Power BI service portal, which of course it's there, but also through Teams. So basically what you end up having is this datasets area here, which is the hub itself, which will highlight recommended datasets that are based on the promoted and curated flags that we've talked about ad nauseum on this show. But this is where I can see all the data sets that I have access to with those kind of highlighted. Also, I can go to recent to see things that I've looked at recently. And I really love that once you drill in, let me kind of zoom in a little bit on this, you get a, I don't know what we're calling this page, but a dataset details page that shows, where does this come from, who certified it, when's the last time it's been refreshed, either create a report or analyze it in Excel. And then look at all the other things that have been built off of it. I love this. This is kind of a unique thing that I don't think we've had this view to date anywhere else. I could be wrong. But basically showing here's all the other reports that are based on this data set. Whether or not that was built by the original publisher or author of that data set. So this could be in other workspaces that you might have access to. So this is a really good discoverability mechanism. I really, really, really love this. And again, it gives you enough more motivation again to think about the dataset certification process inside your organization, whether for promotion or for certification proper, because again, this really starts to highlight that. I always try to talk to the organizations that I'm working with to kind of take that seriously and think about what that process looks like, what it takes to qualify a data set as promoted or as especially certified. So this gives a little more motivation, I think, to do that. So big fan of this. Watch for more about that as it goes on. Here's another really new and novel capability inside the service: the ability to create a report from nothing, I guess, except the data on your clipboard. So you don't have to, even if you're creating something very simple, you no longer have to start in Power BI Desktop. So if you have, and the example I kind of walk through mostly is data on your clipboard, really. So going ahead and saying create, paste or manually enter some data, and then being able to go in and do some basic manipulation of the data through like a Power Query type functions. So doing first rows headers and all those kinds of things, setting the data types. These are things you'd expect to do in Power Query, and then being able to create a report off of that. So if you have something really simple you just need to get done, and you don't necessarily want to kind of go through the traditional path of Power BI Desktop, downloading that and getting that up there, this is pretty good. Of course, this is not full-on data modeling. You're not going to have near all the capabilities for creating an enterprise data set that you would have through Power BI Desktop. But being able to do this through here, and even some kind of analytic stuff, checking the default aggregation on these things. I thought this was really great, and I think this will certainly fill a gap for some folks. This is not enterprise level data sets, but if you need to create, copy paste something and throw it in there, then this is a really good way to do it. All right, so I've talked for quite a while. I'm trying to remember when we announced XMLA endpoints. I think it's been, well, I don't even want to say. I think it's been at least a year at this point. But it's been a long time coming for true enterprise data set management in the Power BI service without having to rely on external services like analysis services on premises or Azure analysis services. And I think that with GA and some of the new capabilities that we added this month, it's there. So being able to manipulate, create, modify, delete role membership through the XML endpoint. So being able to automate those kinds of things, being able to deploy to a live connection in a workspace, and then using service principals to act on that XML endpoint. So I think this kind of rounds out the things that really were needed to make this an enterprise tool. You do have to go in and set up, is your XMLA endpoint on, off, and if it's on, is it read only or read write for some of the things that we just talked about. So, and then it kind of goes back through and talks about what does this enable, right? Use of SQL Server Profiler, use of the tabular editor in DAX Studio, ALM Toolkit. Really, really great stuff. If you're a Power BI person, or you're maintaining Azure Analysis Services models or Analysis Services models on premises, I think it's time to kind of take a look at this and see where this applies for you if you haven't already. So really excited about that GA. Way to go, Power BI team, to kind of see this chapter kind of closed and move on to the next chapter here. This is awesome. All right, moving off of the Power BI stuff. So first, the December update of the Power BI Desktop, which is generally available. So that's great, worth mentioning. I like this one. Execution logs are now available for the console runs, meaning if you have Power BI Desktop and you do a run locally, that is going to get saved up to the service in run history, which makes sense, but that's a change from previous behavior. You can now start trials from the desktop, which I've actually worked with a few customers on POCs and those kinds of things where that would have been useful, and really broad support for sensitive text. So passwords ranging from being able to have an input variable that's a sensitive text like a password, and then being able to apply that variable to subsequent fields like passwords. Like, in this case, in this example, it's launching Excel, which requires a password, which I got from my input variable, so I can kind of flow that through my entire flow to be a little redundant there. So use of IMEs for recorders now. So if you have to have some characters that are on your non-native keyboard, we now make that a little easier. PDF actions. I thought this one was great because, it's not too far-fetched if you're doing things on your desktop through automation. You might be doing some things with PDF, so extracting images, extracting texts, picking out particular pages and then merging them back together. I think this one's super great. Additional conditional operators, so having more flexibility there. Contains, isn't empty, those kinds of things. Timeouts on waits. So this was a really good maturity month for this. A lot of fit and finish, a lot of great kind of power here with the PDFs and those kinds of things, especially on top of the GA. So this has been a good one to see. So I mentioned this one at the top. There's a bunch of cool new commands in the new CLI for M365. I at first wasn't going to talk about it, but then I kept scrolling like we talked about, and I said, hey, this is actually some pretty meaty stuff. I was excited about this one. We are now publishing Docker images to Docker Hub that have the latest versions of M365. So if you always want to get the latest and greatest, but you don't want to stain an environment with the prereqs and those kinds of things, here you go. And we document here. This comes with Node, Bash, PowerShell, and all of those things. So pretty good maturity thing from this perspective. Plus, it just makes it easier to try. So
I wonder if you couldn't store like your config portfolios as container deployment patterns.
Why not? Absolutely.
Right? Then you'd have a guaranteed version of the CLI. You'd have the, you know what I mean? Like you'd have to.
It's DevOps.
Yeah. I don't know. I just was kind of thinking like, how would I nerd out on this a little bit? I have no time to do so. Yeah. But if anybody else does, you know, let us know.
Yep, I don't think it'd be too hard to get nerdy on this pretty quickly. So, yes, this is pretty good. All right, some new commands here. I thought this was great, and some of these you don't realize it's not there until either you need it or we announced that we added it, and it's like, oh, that wasn't there. So, setting the default content type for a SharePoint Online list, great. So, if you need to do some kind of automation around that, now you can do that using the M365 CLI. Getting details about direct routing calls, maybe within a given time period. So this
stuff is super important if you need to vault this, because we only keep it for so long ourselves, right? And essentially, you just batch this out. We've all done this with PBXs forever, and now you can do it here.
Yep.
So I'm just going to say,
like, same one here. So getting details about the PSTN calls within a given time period, same kind of stuff there.
I use that with somebody, and there's also a Graph API to do it. There's a bunch of ways, right, in order to do it. There's like GUI API and a Power something for that. Well, here's your script.
Yep, absolutely. And speaking of that, I'll get to that. I'll kind of circle back to that in a second. So good foreshadowing there. Searching Yammer. So this is great if you need to do some sentiment or some of those kinds of things, or just automate searches for yourself. You can do that. Couple this on top of the Docker image from above and automate your Yammer searches. And then this is what I was going to talk about here. There's a library with sample scripts. So quite a bit of stuff here I looked at. Categorized under like Azure Active Directory, Teams, right? So governed, orphaned Microsoft Teams.
What do they got in Power Automate, I wonder?
I'm sorry?
What's in Power Automate? I'm just curious.
Basically like vaulting data, getting inventory by users.
Well, that's super important, right? I mean, that's awesome.
Yep. So I'm really happy about this. I hope that, I think I would like to see this kind of maybe over on GitHub, but this is still great. A little library of scripts that can be used on top of the M365 CLI.
Well, they have a little GitHub link in the upper right. Is that?
Maybe that's where this is sourced.
Are we overjudging our peers? We are.
I wasn't trying to judge. If I sounded judgy, I'm sorry.
No, it should be in Git. I was about to say it's not, but it looks like.
I think maybe it is.
Yeah. All right. There we go. So they sort of have a little more friendly UI, because I will admit there are times when for the novice that the GitHub UI isn't as intuitive as maybe the other web page we were looking at.
Sure. Maybe it's buried in here somewhere. Maybe it'll come over. But in any event, I'm just more than anything, I'm thrilled that there's this library. So this is great.
I'm pretty sure that's the actual source code, and then you have this nice presented curated collection somewhere. I'm totally okay with that.
Yep. Here we go. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, a couple more things here really quick. When we first announced Dataverse for Teams, like the kind of big complaint was I could only put it in one team, and that's very limiting. And yes, it was. So now you can break out of that a little bit. So this enables kind of a couple scenarios, namely doing development of a Dataverse app in a team, and then allowing that to go live somewhere else, right? So maybe I have a dev type environment, and then I can go push that elsewhere.
To be clear, every team could have its own sort of Dataverse instance. It was just the busting out to people outside of that, from a security model standpoint, that was the blocker.
Right. Yeah. If I created a Dataverse app, it lived in that team, the end. Right.
That's right. The end. Yeah.
And now it's kind of broken out, which I think this is a natural progression of that, and didn't really honestly take too long to get there. So this is great. One more thing here. This is kind of cool. This is one that I haven't really had the opportunity to use too much. And Doug, I wonder if you have.
I have.
I know you've done some deep Power Apps.
I spent a lot of time on this stuff with the enterprise customer.
Oh, great.
Back in, well, when this first started going out. So there's a manufacturing customer who really wanted to do some governance. So go ahead.
This is awesome. So just a real quick, what is it? So first, PowerUps Monitor is GA. So what's PowerUps Monitor? Why do you care? It's a collaborative tool to kind of do live session sharing.
Kind of like co-surfing.
Yeah, it's co-surfing where I can actually see live telemetry of what's happening on the other user's environment as they're clicking around, right? So I invite someone in, user A, Alice maybe, and they're coming in to watch, and as user B, like I can actually watch what they're doing and see the events that are occurring as they're clicking around. So this is a really cool way to kind of troubleshoot. Someone says, I'm having this problem. And it's like, okay, well, let's start a session. And I can actually see the issues that you're having.
Yeah,
this is really
but
cool.
You get a little more nerdy view of it than just the UI scrape, right? I mean,
Yes.
That's the point.
Oh, yeah. You're actually seeing the events and the
a little more like a live debugger, a remote debugger session kind of thing,
yes,
right?
Like, absolutely. And I can't imagine, especially kind of like distributed and complex applications, how much time this is going to save people. Because it's like,
it's cool.
When I click on the thing happens and it doesn't work. It's like, okay, let's actually start one of these up, and I can, not only can I see what you're seeing, but I can actually see the bones of what's happening behind the scenes. This is really cool. Live debugging.
All right. Well, are you wrapped up then? We're at 11:02. I'm only going to do this. I'm going to do this because you should always end with something like cute puppies or something else. So this is the new trouble at my house. So if you see me kind of dodging away or doing something, I'm dealing with that right here. So that's our.
And who's that, Doug?
That's Momo. That's the new golden doodle member of my my family. Somebody they had female puppies that were not getting adopted, and so we decided to take on a challenge of that. So Happy New Year, and the gift of trouble from that young lady for everybody as a sign off. So we'll be back next week. I'd imagine it'll start to heat up from a change.
I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
People are getting back to work.
Yeah, and people are putting things through QA and release cycles, and all the teams are back on the air. So it's gonna get Bernie. I can feel it already.
I'm seeing the same thing.
Yeah,
so.
Customers are doing it. We're doing it. People are back to work. So we hope everyone is safe and well, and we'll talk to you in a week.
All right.
Thanks, Todd.
Peace and love. See you. Bye.